Welcome back to the Life Well Led podcast. It is so good to be back in the studio, Eric.
I know you've been gone a couple weeks. Where you been? No, I'm kidding.
know.
You've been traveling. It's all good. I held down the fort, though.
Yes, you did. You have had some amazing interviews that we've been releasing. I know we've got a couple more in the pipeline.
That's
so
right.
thanks again to all of our incredible interviewees. It has been really, really fascinating to have some of these conversations with leaders out there in the world.
Absolutely. So, Karen, it's summertime.
Summer.
What does it look like right now as far as where we're going, what we're looking to do? What you got?
Well, I figured today, let's talk about some of the things we're reading. I feel like we're sitting by the pool a lot. There's been lots of vacations, time on planes. So let's talk about what we're reading. Eric and I are both professional development nerds. So lots of professional development, continuing to improve our skills. So we'll share some of our best reads and upcoming reads with you. And then we actually got somebody who submitted an email to us with a very specific issue that they're having with an employee. So we thought we'd read it, we'd dissect it, and we'd talk about it because I think that a lot of you probably have or may in the future run into this very similar scenario.
Let's start then. Who do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first as far as books? I'm happy to do it. Okay, I'm going to do it. So
don't twist your arm.
No, not at all. So the first book that I'm going to read through pretty quickly is Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's been around for a very long time. I was familiar with it in philosophy classes in college, and I've had a good synopsis of it, but I'm excited to actually read it for the first time. So that's high on the list, and that will be number one. Number two is more of a business development book / sales book, is People by You by Jeb Blount of salesgravy.com. There's a lot of sales books out there. I like this one because it's based on you. It's based on not the technique or the strategy or the hands or the tools. It's based on you. Lastly is a book called Immunity to Change by Robert Keegan and Lisa Laskow-Leahy. I was recommended this book by a fellow practitioner. It was also recommended in another book I read because it was cited. So I'm excited to really get into what this book is all about as far as what makes it very difficult to change in human beings as well as entire organizations. So what about you, Karen?
Love that. Okay, let's go. I read through this one so quickly. Fear is My Homeboy. It was highly recommended from a friend, Kim Gamaraz, who's a social emotional learning coach for school districts and teachers. She has a phenomenal community. We're going to have her as a guest on our podcast coming up. But this book is awesome. It's definitely geared toward women, but addressing those fears in your life and how to overcome them. Awesome read. Okay, the next book, Essentialism. This was recommended to me in a podcast. I ordered it immediately. It's really about how to become an essentialist and cutting all the crap out of your life. Really interesting, kind of long, but it's a quick read. It's really, really interesting. Last one, Quiet. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. I have started a couple of pages of this. It is super, super intellectual. Really, really fascinating. The last 80 pages of this book is all of her research and notes from writing the book. But it is really, really fascinating. If you're an introvert and you're a leader, quite a great read to really start to understand what that actually means and how you can use your introverted skills to your benefit. Eric, are you one of those people that can read multiple books at the same time, or are you one that
not at all.
has to start one, finish one?
I have to start one and finish one. I can't be all over the place. It's just not possible for me. I got to be able to focus on one book. And if I try to read another one, I feel guilty that I haven't finished the other one. So it's just not possible for me.
Yeah. Book guilt is like a real thing.
Yeah.
We could do a whole podcast just on how guilty we feel when we don't finish the last 20 pages of a book.
And it's easy to do. Like if you have a really dense book, like I was rereading a book and I couldn't finish it because every chapter I'd have to stop, pause, and take ideas from. And I just wanted to finish it, but for the sake of finishing it, it's just not worth it. I want to actually learn from this book. The first time I read it, I forgot a lot of things, even though I was really trying. But now that I've advanced more and grown up more, it made more sense. So yeah, it's tough. As much as you have book guilt of not finishing a book, you can have book guilt for not finishing it fast enough and wanting to get on to the next one. So book guilt, real thing.
We need a coaching session.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, this next part I am really excited about. As I mentioned in the opening, we received an email from somebody looking for advice on a very specific scenario that they're going through. And as we were reading through it and getting more detail, it was extremely relatable to many of our clients that we have had in this leadership space.
Absolutely.
And so we thought we got their permission. We're going to read the scenario to you. And then we're going to talk about what advice we would give as leadership coaches. So let's dive into it. Dear Karen and Eric, I manage a sales team and have a high-performing employee whose recent behavior has become disruptive. For the sake of this, we will call him John. So John has been a key player in the sales team, consistently meeting and exceeding his targets for the past 5 years. His deep knowledge of the product and market has made him a go-to person for our new team members and a respected figure within the team. However, about 2 months ago, John started arriving late to meetings, often missing the first few minutes of important discussions. His emails have become terse and sometimes go unanswered for longer than usual. During team meetings, he is more likely to criticize new ideas than offer constructive feedback, which is out of character for him. Other team members have started to feel demoralized. They look up to John and are very concerned about his behavior, which they feel is creating a negative atmosphere on the team. Some have even started avoiding interactions with him unless absolutely necessary, which is affecting team cohesion and collaboration. As John's manager, I want to address these issues delicately, acknowledging his value to the team while encouraging a return to his previous positive behavior. What should I do next?
Well, that's a great question. And, what I would say, I mean, coaching it, I'd ask a lot of questions like what has his past been like? What's going on in his current life? Does he share his personal life? Like when you're a manager, you almost have to do the same thing like you would as a coach or a consultant. You really want to try to find what the issue is here. But let me caveat and say, this is not necessarily a technical fix. I highly doubt this is one conversation is going to fix this. So expectation wise, you got to have a reasonable expectation that this is a progression. This is going to take time. It's not a one conversation fix. So that being said, I would start with questions. Right?
I think even before that, though, it's kind of what they've already started, which is thinking through the scenario.
Oh, no,
thinking
you're absolutely
through
right.
what's going on and trying to put pieces together.
Nope, you're right. Absolutely agree. You diagnose before you ask questions to figure out what questions you want to ask. Start with a diagnosis of the situation. So first and foremost.
So we know John's behavior has changed. He used to be a very positive person.
That's an objective facts of our observations.
Right. So all of a sudden now it's been 2 months and this person has realized that John's behavior has changed. So there's been a change in the behavior. So what possibly could be causing that?
Yeah, I mean, the interpretations you could make is maybe it's familial, maybe it's something personal life. Did something, and you would maybe ask that if that came up, like what happened, maybe not that specifically, but what has happened recently that has changed? Maybe it's something professionally speaking. It could be a values change. He could be bored at his job. He could be complacent at his job. It could be anything. It could be a mental health challenge that's underlying all of this. We don't know, but the goal is to not necessarily say, John, you need to do this because we've noticed this and therefore you need to change. That's not going to work. The goal is to really try to diagnose what's going on and say from an empathetic point of view, how can I help you?
Yeah.
How can we make that? That's the goal to get there. But first, let's figure out what those scenarios might be when we ask these questions.
Well, I think even taking the emotion out of it and not being angry, as John is clearly being somewhat destructive in his behavior to the team, dismissive, creating a negative culture. I mean, it's hard not to get emotionally wound up when people are doing that. So, how do you, as John's advocate, take the emotion out of it and address this from a place of compassion and concern for him?
Exactly. Being able to get there is really the start of looking up on the balcony, if you will, and saying, all right, what has happened? That's why we ask the questions of maybe it's personal, maybe it's professional issues. But, then contributing to that is like, why, what else has contributed to that maybe in the workplace? So you can't really do it at home unless you know more info. So based on what we know, why is he more direct and short? What have we noticed and observed that has made a difference here? If he's very, let's say, for example, he's very, financially driven, and maybe something's changed in terms of the financial structure for it. Maybe whatever has changed that you can find out is also a contribution of yourself as a manager and as the organization as well. In other words, what else has contributed that could potentially have an effect on John's behavior?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, this looks like first trying to diagnose the situation, thinking through all aspects. Then it's the difficult conversation that has to be had. It's
Yep.
the John, I've noticed a change. What's going on? And hoping that he will be vulnerable and share whatever that is. But as you said, Eric, maybe it's a change in his home dynamic that he may or may not be willing to share. Maybe it's a change in compensation somehow. Maybe sales are down.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he has been waiting for a promotion and he felt like the perfect moment passed and now he's feeling angry about it. I mean, I think there's so many different things that we might not even as managers be able to um, know, interpret, because we don't know a lot of things unless the employee tells us.
You can't really solve the problem if you don't know
Right.
enough variables. So the point is, don't go into problem solving mode. Don't go
Right.
into fix it mode. Get into curious mode. Be curious. Ask
Yeah.
questions. Be compassionate and empathetic as you ask them. But figure out what's going on before anybody makes any decisions.
Yeah. So then, once you have this conversation with John and you ask him, hey, John, what's going on? Then you can really start to dive into the next step.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you can reinterpret the data, observe it, and then make some interpretations. Like, okay, maybe let's say he's bored. He just says, I'm
Yeah.
just bored. I've been doing this for so long. I'm so good at it. And now I'm just annoyed that we bring people in and they don't know what they're doing. And, I'm just bored with it. I don't like doing it anymore. That could happen. That's actually pretty common. And so at that point, what is it about that we can actually pique John's interest? What is it that we're allowing to, as a system, like, contributing your part of the mess? What did we do that we didn't contribute to John's happiness? In other words, if it's been boring, why haven't we changed and been more innovative in what we've offered for programming as far as learning development is concerned, or promotional opportunities, or leadership opportunities if he's interested in that, or taking informal leadership roles by actually having him mentor people, whatever it might be that would actually make him want to work harder and better. That's a great example of doing it. And that's where you just try to experiment and say, all right, what is it? And have him part of the process.
I think John is only one piece of this, though.
Yes.
Right
Agreed.
now, you're concerned about John. You want to get to the bottom of what's going on, and you want to be able to address that with him. And that looks like a difficult conversation that comes from a place of empathy and compassion.
Right.
Once you've had that, you also then have to manage the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm.
You've got people on your team who are avoiding John,
Yep.
who are feeling disempowered by him,
Mm-hmm.
who are really not feeling that team cohesion. And the culture is starting to disintegrate because of how John is showing up. So you as a leader have two really, really difficult roads ahead, not only addressing John, but also addressing the rest of the team in a way that's productive that builds trust and that really helps them get back on track. So what does that look like?
And that was, as a leader, you may be self-reflective of what did I do to contribute to this and what can I do to help move this forward. But you can't do it alone. You have to
Right.
get buy-in. You're getting John's buy-in, and you're getting the disempowered and disenfranchised employees who are upset with John to buy in as well. So that conversation with John is one. Having a conversation with those other employees is two, and maybe three is bringing them all together and having a not pointing fingers conversation, but I've noticed the team's culture and cohesion is not what it used to be. Calling out the elephant in the room. What do we think we can do to have a change here? And really start having that diagnosis conversation after the observations and start figuring out ways that they can implement things better. Maybe John's boredom is, maybe he does need to mentor somebody. And maybe that other person is annoyed because he was being direct, but not realizing maybe he wants to help after he gets a more incentive to do so. Maybe it's a personal thing at home. Maybe he doesn't have to address that there, of course, but being able to be more thoughtful and more conscious of how he shows up at work each day is affecting the rest of the team, which if you have a compensation structure that's based on individual performance and the health of the company or the health of the team, then yeah, that might be affecting him as well. So whatever it might be, include people in the process and have the conversation so that you can come up with solutions together. It's not all on you as the leader to come up with that solution. Everybody has to buy in, or as many people as possible, to be able to create what that progress looks like.
Amen. Those elephant in the room conversations can be some of the hardest things that you have to do, and you just don't know where they're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
You pretty much, I mean, before you get into that situation, before you bring all the players in and you say, okay, what's going on? You do have to sit back and go, okay, here's how this person's feeling, and here's how that person's feeling, and here's, you need to know all of their, in what our world is called factions. You need to know where they're coming from and what they're bringing to the table and what they're fearing and what they're willing and not willing to lose when they come to these, or what is at stake.
Yeah,
when they're coming here. You have John, who maybe is going through some really personal things that he's not willing to even share with you. And he can just say, hey, there's things going on in my personal life and I'm distracted at work. And he's bringing that negative energy in. Well, you have to take that into consideration while also bringing the other people to this table and showing that same empathy and compassion and letting him only share what he's willing to share, and being that moderator in a environment that's just filled with emotion can be really difficult.
Yes, it can, but you do have a great purpose that you can bring everybody together, and that's sharing a common purpose or sharing a drive that everybody shares, which is the success of the team, whether that's financially driven, KPI driven. But ultimately, if everybody really cares about the success of the team and you've done a good job creating that in your culture, then you say you don't say it, but let's just in your mind, one of your team members is hurting. So how do I get to convey that, even though I can't share all that information, to say maybe John goes and takes an hour each day extra to cool off or do something, and then people pick up the slack and then he can do something in return. Whatever the solution might be, it's creating the buy-in with a shared common purpose, addressing losses, and ultimately figuring out how everybody can contribute and tie into to get there. And that may take multiple conversations.
Yeah.
It's a progress oriented, not a solution or a one-stop quick fix.
Well, it didn't happen overnight. So it's
No,
not
you're
be
right.
fixed overnight.
That's a great point. This is not something that just happened overnight. It wasn't just wife had a bad conversation with him. They're going through a divorce. That went, and hopefully that's not the case, but that happened for maybe years. This progression is slowly getting there to a point where you finally have noticed and said, I am done doing this as a manager. So I'm done tolerating this. Right? Because you tolerated it for a serious amount of time, whatever it's a month, few months, a year, and well, in this case, 2 or 3 months. Now you're saying, I tolerated this for 2 months, or I tolerated this before, and it progressed to that. So what is your part in the mess? And be vulnerable about that too. If you're looking for vulnerability, not just personal details, not always going to happen, but if you're going to be vulnerable with them, it makes it much easier for them to be vulnerable with you.
So think about the situation. Really diagnose what's going on. Try to consider all the factors at stake here. have that conversation with John. Try to pull back on your personal emotions and approach this from a curious and empathetic perspective. Have the tough conversation with John. And then also with your team, have the conversation, acknowledge that you're listening to them, acknowledge that you're hearing them, and that you instill trust that you are handling it. And then if it gets to the point where you need to bring the entire team to the table, address the elephant in the room, have the tough conversation, get through it. I promise it's going to be better on the other side than it is going unsaid, because that tension continues to build just like a boiling pot until something explodes or something changes. And then things become way more drastic. And over time, you're just disintegrating your culture. And you just can't have that.
You have people leave, you have people upset, you
Yeah.
lose performance. At the end of the day, ignoring it seems easy, but it leads to really bad results. If you don't ignore it and you swallow the bad tasting medicine and have the tough conversation, you have a better chance of making and recreating the culture that you once had, or even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're still standing up for everybody else on the team. You're making them feel heard. You're making them feel valued. You're really leaning into what's going on with John. Know your people, trust your people, instill trust in them that you are handling the situation, and good luck.